Boker Tov. Today's daf is daf Kuf Nun Zayin in Baba Basra. We learn for Achenu Kol Beis Yisrael and Asum Matzar V'Shiv. Says the Mishnah, Nafal Abayis Alav Alaviv. Let's take a man Ruvain. His father is Yaakov. They were both in the house at the same time, and Ruvain had no money, as happens sometimes, right? The father had money, but the son had no money. So Nafal Abayis Alav Alav. And now the house collapsed, and they were both killed. Or Rav Meir Shapiro, either with his father, even Reuben had his father Yaakov, or maybe an uncle who didn't have any children, and he would have been the heir. Reuben would have been the heir. And now the question is, Reuben, who died, had no money, but he had obligations. He had to pay his ksuba for his wife, the almana, ubalcho, but he also had creditors. Now, who died first? We don't know. Right? House collapse. We don't know who died first. Yosheav, the heirs of the father. Now, who are the heirs of the father? Reuben died, right? It could have been his brother Shimon, or it could have been Reuben's own children, because Reuben's own children stand to inherit from the grandfather, right? If the father's dead, we go down to Reuben, right? So the heirs say, Omrim haben meis rishon. First the father died. First the Reuben died. And then let's say the grandfather. Let's look at it this way, that Reuben is the son, and his son is Chanoch, right? That's how Reuben in the Torah had a son, Chanoch, and Palu. So he had a son. So there's a grandfather, a son, and a grandson. The grandfather and the son both died at the same time. We don't know who died first. Now the grandson, Chanoch, says, you know who died first? His father died first. So if his father died first, the obligations, and he had no money, couldn't pay for the ksuba. The father-in-law doesn't have to pay the ksuba, the grandfather in this case, right? And the creditors can't collect from the father, right? So let's say that. So if the son died first, they're out. The ksuba can't be paid, and the creditor is out, right? And so they're claiming that the son died first, meaning Reuven died first, and then the grandfather died. So who gets the money? The grandchildren. The grandchildren get the money. Ubalichova says, no. The grandfather died first. When the grandfather died, who inherits the grandfather? The son, right? When Yaakov died, Reuben inherited him, so there was money to pay. And we had an obligation. Either the wife comes, she needs her ksuba, or the creditors come. So what do? So again, Nafal Abai says the Mishnah, Nafal Abai of all of Al or uncle, whoever who was bequeathing, who was transmitting the Yerusha to this son Reuven. Reuven had obligations. Yosheav Omrim, the heirs of the grandfather. Ab means the grandfather over here, like the grandson, let's say. They say that the son, meaning Reuven, died first, and therefore the obligations, the father died with no money and he couldn't pay his obligations. The money went to the money stayed with the grandfather who had the money initially. Who had the money? The father, Reuben, had no money when he died. Had no money. The question is, did he inherit his father a second before he died? In which case, the obligations would have had to be paid. But if he died before the father, if he died before the grandfather, then they couldn't be paid. So the Yoshea of Omrim ben Meisrish Meisav Ubalechov. The creditor says, meaning the creditor or the ksuba, the wife, the almana who wants to collect her ksuba, no, ha'av meis rishon. First the grandfather died, and then Reuben died, so there was money to pay. So what do you do? Besham yom mechloko. Shama says he split it because you don't know who died first, and therefore they're both like muhsik. Now, who's really a muhsik in the money? Who really had the money? The grandfather. Before the building collapsed, the grandfather had the money. The son, Reuben, had no money. Right, so he had no money. So why would you say split it? The answer is, he says, because Beis Shammai holds that a star which is standing to be collected as if it's collected already. So therefore, it's like the creditor already has the money. It's a hard shita to understand, but that's Beis Shammai shita. Beis Hillel Omrim, the Chasam Chaskakam, leave them where they were. They leave them where they were. Why? Because think about it. The grandsons stand to inherit either way. Think about it, right? This grandson says, look, you're not sure if my father died first or the grandfather died first, right? Either way, we're the heir. If the grandfather died first, and then the son. So we are his heirs. Yes, there's other obligations there too, but we are the heirs. And if the father died first, they're also the heirs. So they're like a vadai. And the creditor is only a suffix. He doesn't know. The creditor, meaning the almana or other creditors that the Reuben had before he died, doesn't know because Reuben had no money. The only way he could have gotten money is if the father died a second before he died in the building collapse. But maybe it was the other way around. Maybe Reuben died first. So when he died, there was no money. A man owed money. He died. There was no money. That's it. They're out.
What's wrong with splitting it?
What's wrong with splitting it is because
It's not exactly fair.
that's what Beis Shammai says, split it, but because the creditors are really a suffix. They're only a 50% chance. Let's assume it's a 50% chance that they could get the money, right? Because they're only going to get the money if the grandfather died first and then Reuven inherited it a second before he died. But the heirs like Reuven's children, let's say, they're for sure going to get money either way. They for sure stand to if the grandfather died first, or if the son died first, Reuven died first. Either way, they're in line to get the money. So they're for sure. So we have a klal ain suffix motzi midei vadai. If this is for sure and this is a suffix, you go with the one that's a vadai. They're for sure heirs. They for sure magia lehem money, whereas the creditor is a suffix. So Beis Shammai, so therefore Beis Hillel says, leave the money where it was. It was in the hands of the grandfather. We assume that it stayed there too. And we assume that the son died first. That's Beis Hillel's sheet. And we go like Beis Hillel. Tanan Hasim. Now we're going to see where we can apply this Mishnah. Tanan Hasim, we learn, if you lend money to somebody and a written loan, the assumption is that a written loan has a mortgage on it, meaning that he can collect from real estate. That's how it is. Even if they didn't write that, we have a cloud that Achrayus is told sofer. If you didn't put an obligation, that's why you write it in a star. If there's a star, there's an IOU. People hear about it, and in fact, therefore, other purchasers. Let's say we have a creditor and a borrower. The borrower borrowed money, and he wrote an IOU, and it was signed by Adam. So when the creditor now comes to collect the money, he can go after assets that the borrower sold subsequent to the loan, right? Because the loan was there first. People hear about the loan, and therefore he can go after those assets, even real estate. So the creditor can collect even from real estate. Again, real estate that the borrower had that was sold subsequent. He sold them to a purchaser subsequent to the loan. But if there was no star, it was simply Adam there, so it was like a milva star, only go because people wouldn't hear about it. So it's not fair. In other words, if you had I come to buy some money. I'm a purchaser. I'm buying a piece of land from this guy, and I check in the bank. Does he owe any money? Are there any creditors? No, there's not. There don't seem any creditors. But he did have a creditor. He borrowed money from somebody verbally. Well, not everybody knows about that. If it was written in a document, people hear about it. It's registered, people know. It's not in a document, so it's not fair to penalize me. I bought the land from this borrower not knowing that he had owed money to somebody else. So therefore, the creditor cannot come after me. He can only get from a chasam nechara, meaning assets that are not obligated, like cash or real estate that he would have. Now, here's the big question of the day. Boy, Shmuel asked this question. What happens if the borrower, what does a borrower write in a shtar? He says, listen, I owe you money. I owe you, let's say I borrow $100 and I'm going to pay you, and I obligate as a mortgage all my real estate. Whatever real estate I have is obligated to you. Okay, what happens if he says, not only do I obligate my real estate that I have now, I obligate my real estate that I'm going to buy later on. Is that obligated or not? That's the question.
How can that be? Can it be?
It's not. Oh, so that's what you could say. That's the question.
Obligate something that he hasn't got.
Okay, but let's say he says, I'm going to obligate stuff even that I buy later on. Now we'll see. Let's analyze it. Boy Shmuel, the ikni, if he writes in the IOU, even I'm going to obligate even stuff that I buy later on. And then he did buy something, right? Mao, meaning what happened? You have a borrower and a creditor. The borrower borrowed $100 and he says, I obligate my real estate and all real estate that I buy later on. And later on, he buys real estate. And he sold that they call it the new real estate. He sold the new real estate to Yankel, to a purchaser. And now when the creditor comes to collect the money, right, can he go after that real estate or not? That's the question. I'll leave it to Rav Meir. According to Rav Meir, the famous Rav Meir Shita Damer Odamak Davar Shalom, he had find Rav Akiva also that way. Rav Meir is like the famous author of you can be Mak Davar Shalom. I could sell you fruits that aren't here yet. They're going to grow on the tree. They're not even here yet. So lo tibach, there's no question to Badikana. Certainly, if I listen to this, if I can obligate, if I could sell you something that I don't have yet, I sell you the fruits that are going to grow or the crops that are going to grow. There's no crops right now. I could sell you that according to a mayor. So certainly the land is here. I just don't own it yet. I said I'm going to obligate the land that I buy, right? Real estate that I buy later on, I'm going to obligate that. Well, that's even better because real estate is here. I just don't own it yet. The fruits and the crops aren't even here. So if a mayor says you can give something, you can be makdav shelo ba'olam. If it's not even here, I could sell that. So certainly I can. The famous question is, when he says, I marry you, I give you kedushin, on the condition that when you're Megayer, when you convert, we're married, right? So so does it work or not? According to Meir, it works. You can makdav shelo ba'olam. Or I marry you, I give you kedushin after your sister, who's his wife, dies. I marry you, right? Because he can only marry you after whatever the condition was. I mean, or after you're meshuchra, if you're in a shifcha, whatever. So Rav Meir says that works. So according to Rav Meir, says you can be like Rav Shalom. Certainly, you can obligate yourself for land which is here. You just don't own it yet. So you can't give something which is not here yet. Maybe the fruits haven't grown yet, but over here the land is here. So what would you say? Or it's also possible that the rabbis made a takana, even though logically it may not work, but the rabbis many times made a takana to encourage lenders to lend money to borrowers. Don't forget, Minat Torah, there was no, you couldn't get interest, right? The rabbis came in the last couple hundred years, the rabbis made what we call a heter iska, so that you can get interest and stuff like that. Before that, it was simply, a matter of being a nice guy, of doing the right thing, lending money to the poor. But a lot of people don't want to borrow, don't want the poor, the poor guy comes and he wants to borrow money. He's got he has no assets, got no collateral, he gives post-dated checks, they're not worth very much, right? Post-dated checks, so what are they worth? So the rabbi said, that maybe even if he obligates something that he's going to buy, the rabbi said that it's also, maybe that's the issue. So that's the question according to Rabbanan. So according to Meir, would for sure work, right? It would for sure work. The borrower bought something subsequent to the loan, and that which is obligated because he wrote in the shtar, stuff that I buy. In fact, it's a standard shtar. Rashbam points out that was the standard lexicon in the shtar. They wrote, I obligate all the real estate that I have and stuff that I'm going to buy. So here, if he bought it later on, but then he sold it, can you go after that property or not? That's the question. Amar Rav Yosef. So Gemara says we're trying to bring from this case. Amar Rav Yosef Tashma. We have a shayla like this. What happened? You have a creditor and a borrower. The borrower borrowed $1,000, right? And after he borrowed the money and he owed the money, an IOU and all, the creditor sold him a piece of property that was worth $1,000, let's say. He sold it to him. He sold him a piece of property. So Admon says over there, Admon is a Tana, and he says, listen, the borrower now says, I paid you already. I paid you. If I still owe you the money, why did you sell me a piece of property? If I had the $1,000 to buy the property, you should have taken that to cover the loan. You should have called the loan. Why did you sell me the property? If you sold me the property, it's obvious that you consider the loan already repaid. So Admon says it's considered paid. The Chum say, no. Doesn't mean it's considered paid. The creditor was smart. The creditor said, listen, you owe me $1,000. I'll sell you the property for $1,000. He sold him the property for $1,000 and he paid him. He says, why did he do that? Because this way, if he doesn't pay him the $1,000 for the loan, he has what to collect from. That's the Chum say, listen, the creditor was smart. He sold him a piece of karka, because he can collect from there, right? He can use that as collateral, that piece of land that he sold. Now, think about it. What happened over here? The creditor lent him $1,000, right? Creditor lent the bar. Then afterwards, the creditor sold him $1,000, sold him a piece of property for $1,000. That property is new property that came in after the loan, right? He first borrowed $1,000. He owes him $1,000, and then the creditor is smart. He says, "Well, I'm going to sell you a piece of property for $1,000 so that the creditor has what to collect from." But that piece of property was mortgaged after the loan. So what do you see? That you could mortgage something after the loan. Amalei Rava, Mine, what are you talking about? Collecting from the borrower himself? Mine Kamar. Mine Afilu Miglimada Kasve. When you have to collect from the borrower, you can collect anything that he has. What are you talking about? He says, we're talking about an IOU. The creditor lent the borrower whatever he lent him, $500. And now the borrower got some property afterwards. So the question is, can you collect that property? If the borrower, if it's still in the possession of the borrower, you could take his shirt. He owes you the money. Take whatever whatever he has. Our question was, the borrower bought a piece of land for $500 and he sold it to Yankel. Can the creditor go after Yankel? That's the issue, right? At the time of the loan, he didn't have that property. He bought the property subsequently. He sold it to Yankel. Can you go after Yankel? But if the borrower has the property, you could take his shirt, take anything he has. The guy doesn't have money, take his car, take his tefillin, whatever you want, take whatever he has. There's no question about that. Kikami boy, our question is, the ikni, he bought it, kana, he because he said, the property that I buy will also be mortgaged to you. Kana, then he bought, umach, and then he sold it. Or the ikni, he said, the property that I will buy, kana, he bought it, bahorish, or he transmitted it by inheritance to somebody else. Can you go after that property? The same question would be whether he sold it to Yankel or whether he bequeathed it to somebody. Can you go after that property? That's our question. Amrav Chana. So why is this question brought down here? Obviously, because we're going to bring a proof from our Mishnah. Amrav Chana Tashma, look at our Mishnah. Our Mishnah said, Nafal Bais Halav Alaviv, Ruvain, the son, and Yaakov, let's call him Yaakov was the grandfather, and Ruvain was his son. And then the Hanoch was Ruvain's son. And Ruvain and Yaakov both died in a building collapse. Alav Valmarishav. They fell on it, either on Reuven and his father, or Reuven, let's say, on his uncle, and his uncle had no children, so Reuven would have been the heir. And Reuven had obligations, either to pay this almana or to pay an outstanding creditor loan. Yarshe Avram, again, what did our Mishnah say? This is just repeating the Mishnah. The heirs of the father, meaning the grandfather, like Chanoch, the grandson, say, Haben Meisrishan. Reuven died first, so therefore we stand in line to get the money of the grandfather who had the money. But the creditors, including the almana, say, no, the grandfather died first. Reuven died a second later, but Reuven inherited from the grandfather, and therefore we can collect. Okay, that's what the Mishnah said. And what did we say? We said, Beis Hillel says, no, leave the money where it was. Presumably, it was in the hands of the grandfather. So we assume that the grandfather died last. If you say that when a man says, I obligate stuff that I'm going to buy, and he bought it, and he sold it, or he bequeathed it, lo mishtabed, if you say you can, so what? Even if the father died first, but the son didn't have it. Whatever, these obligations that the son had, right? To pay the almoner, to pay a creditor. He had nothing a minute before he died. He had nothing. So when did he get it? A second before he died. Well, that means he got it later on. Is stuff that you get later on obligated? In this case, look at the creditor. The creditor lent Reuven money. Reuven had nothing now when he died. When did he get it? A second before he died. That means he got it afterwards. So can you obligate that too if you say it doesn't work? So what if the grandfather died first? Still, Reuven had nothing when he died. The Ikniu. Amr of Nachman. So here's a proof that it does work. Amr of Nachman, Zeira Chavran Targum, Zeira and our colleague explained it that really you can't collect. Really, it's not obligated. But over here, it's a special case. Mitzvah Yisam Lefro Chavas Avim. There's a special obligation on orphans, meaning on the heirs. Unfortunately, say even if it's not the children, it's whoever the heirs are, to pay off the debts of the father. Special mitzvah. It's a mitzvah, like a mitzvah Rabbana, mitzvah Yisam Lefro Chavas Avim. That's what the argument over here is. In other words, here the Baal Chov was claiming we have an obligation. Tosfos points out that you even force them, meaning because of this mitzvah. What is the grandchild Chanoch saying? Chanoch is saying, my father died first and then the grandfather, so there was nothing there, right? So the Baal Chov says, no, the grandfather died first and then the son died. Yes, but the son died way after the loan. So how does that work? He says, you're right, it really doesn't work. But there's an obligation on the grandchildren, on the Chanoch, to pay off the obligations there's an obligation to pay off the loans of the father, and therefore we have a valid claim. You owe us money. You have the money now.
Is it an obligation or is it just?
It's a mitzvah. It's a mitzvah to pay off the loan of the father. It's a mitzvah. It's a mitzvah Rabbanan, but they can force them that way. So if that's mitzvah, so the Gemara asks, what do you mean? if that's the case, though, think about it. The original loan that took place that Reuben had borrowed money, there was no real estate to pay that off with, right? So therefore, Maskil Ravashi, 3 lines from David Gemara, Milval Pel, therefore, it's simply a verbal loan because it wasn't really mortgaged by any property. There was no property there, right? He borrowed the money and he obligated whatever he had. He didn't have anything because if he had any property then, he could go after that property. But he only got this property later on. Therefore, it's really not a milva b'shtar. Even if it's written down, it's like a milva peh because that stuff wasn't there. So milpel for Rav Shmuel himself. Shmuel is one who asks this kasha: is it an obligation or not? Stuff that you're going to get later on, can that be obligated? Even if you're right, you wrote in it, I obligate stuff that I'm going to buy. Shmuel asked that as a question. Shmuel himself said, if Shmuel says milva peh and Shmuel you can't collect. You can't collect from Yorshim or from Lekuchas. A milva peh cannot be collected, even when there's a mitzvah, but you can't collect it. Rashbam points out, therefore, it's a kasha Shmuel on himself. Rashbam 3 lines from the non-page of Shmuel Davar Tabayu. Come on, we get pasha milva peh and go menosh b'chi amin a mitzvah al yisomim. How do you milva b'shtar? Okay, if it's a mushtar, then it's an obligation. But over here, it's a milva peh, and you can't collect from the Yorshim. So he says, that rule about the Yorshim having an obligation is only if it's a milva b'shtar. This is like a milva peh. Why? Because there was no milva b'shtar. What's the idea? That I'm obligating the real estate. The father had no real estate, obviously, at the time of the loan because he died with nothing. And if there was real estate, you can go after that real estate even if he sold it. Even a milva peh, again, because the rabbis made rules so that people should be encouraged to lend money. So
the Yorshim were not obligated to pay their father's debts.
yeah, so here we say it's a mitzvah that there's right. Minat Torah maybe not, but the rabbi said there is an obligation to pay. It's a mitzvah to pay. It's a mitzvah d'Rabbanan to pay off the debt. So here we're assuming that's only if it's only b'shtar, not milval peh. So therefore, what's the argument over here? In other words, why isn't it arrived from our Mishnah that iknikani, when he makes an obligation that's going to take place later on, I don't have it right now, he's obligated because otherwise what's the claim? Even if the grandfather died first, the creditors have nothing to go after because the father only came into this possession a second before he died, way after the loan. So how does it work? Elamai says, no, it only works because it's a mitzvah, but it's no mitzvah over here because only a milval peh. Ella hamani Rav Meir. The answer is he'll say, you know what? Our Mishnah goes like Rav Meir. Our whole issue is Rav Meir holds, we said before, that according to Rav Meir, that I could sell you something that doesn't even exist in the world. So certainly I could sell you something that exists. I just don't own it yet. So it goes like Rav Meir. The answer, Rav Yaakov, Rav Yaakov says, Tashma, let's say again, we're trying to bring a proof to this question. Does Akni work when I obligate myself with a loan? And I say, I mortgage my property that I have now and mortgage I'm going to get in the future. And I buy property in the future and I sell that property. Can the creditor go after that property? Toshma. We have a famous rule that if you write an IOU, right, and let's say the loan took place February 1st, and you put on the date January 1st, that's no good. Why? Because the loan only took place on February 1st, yet maybe the borrower sold some property back in January and you wrote on the day January 1st. Now the creditor can go after that property because it looks like the loan took place January 1st, right? You wrote January 1st instead of February 1st. So that's shtar mukdam. In other words, you wrote a date earlier. The loan took place on February 1st. The obligation took place on February 1st. Before that obligation took place, the borrower had sold some property on January 1st, right? Or January 15th. And now if you write it as January 1st, it looks like the creditor now has a prior lien to the purchaser. So that's no good. But let's say you wrote a later date. Let's say the loan took place February 1st, but you put on it March 1st. Oh, that's pretty good. Why? Because now the creditor can only go after property that was sold on March 1st, even though the loan took place on February 1st. That's kosher. Wait a minute. What do you mean? But if you're saying that property that I'm going to buy later on is not mortgaged to this loan, even if it's later on, it's no good. The iknu. Why? Because it could be property that he bought later on. The loan took place in February and he wrote on it in March 1st. So what if he wrote on March 1st? That means property that the borrower bought in middle of February, could be mortgaged, right? Because he bought it in the middle of February and it could be mortgaged and you can collect it from March 1st. But why can you collect from March 1st? That doesn't work either because he shouldn't be able to collect because he bought it afterwards. In other words, if the loan took place in February 1st and any property that the borrower bought subsequent to February 1st cannot be mortgaged in that loan if it doesn't work. So why does it help to put it if you have a date of March 1st? So he's going to collect from March 1st. That's also no good because you're going to be able to collect stuff from later on. So even if you wrote on the March 1st and he's going to collect it after March 1st, he's going to collect, you can only collect after March 1st. So the loan took place February 1st, but he wrote on the document, I owe you March 1st. So he's only able to, creditor's only able to have a lien on property bought after March 1st. But that's also no good because you're collecting stuff that the borrower came into possession of after the loan took place. Mike Sharon Dicknew. So money Rameir, again, the answers will go like Rameir. So all these proofs, we're trying to bring proof. Does it work? He says, well, it goes like Rameir. That's an answer. So again, it's no proof from there. Amar Mashash Mishmei Rav Tashma. Look at this. You have a case, let's say a borrower, if you stole property, but a simple case is that you had property and there was a creditor, you owed money to him, and you sold the property. You sold it out from under. It was mortgaged to this creditor because the creditor he could go after any of your real estate. Meanwhile, you sold the property to a purchaser, and the purchaser went on the property and he fertilized it and he grew stuff there, etc. And now the creditor came and took the property away. He had a prior lien on it. Okay, so what happens? What about the purchaser? The purchaser is not going to go after the borrower, right? After the borrower who sold him the property. So it says over there, again, the borrower sold the field that was really mortgaged to the creditor. He sold the field to a purchaser, and the purchaser improved vishbicha. And now the creditor came and took away the field. When the purchaser collects his money, he wants to go back. He's going to go back. Hey, you sold me a property that had a proper prior lien on it. When he collects the property, the basic property, the principal, he can collect even from other mortgage properties that were mortgaged, meaning from real estate that the other property that the borrower had. Because the improvements people cannot rely on, they don't know if there or not. Property a man has. So even if you had, if the borrower had other properties, you can collect those properties. The purchaser who got cheated because he bought a piece of property that was taken away by the creditor, he can go after those properties because the people who bought those should have known that those properties were mortgaged to this earlier purchaser. But the improvement you can collect because that's not known. If you say that property that you obligated, that you bought after the loan took place, lo mishtabed is not obligated. So why shouldn't Balchov be able to get the shvach? He shouldn't be able to get the shvach because that's new stuff, right? In other words, it's property. He might have had the property at the time of when he borrowed the money, but the improvements only came later on after he sold it to somebody else. So that's also something new. Again, how money remained. So again, the Gemara says every time we prove that you could acquire, he said, okay, it goes like Rameir, it's no proof. So the Gemara now says, well, there's two ways to look at this. Like Shmuel's question is when I write in the IOU that I'm mortgaging property that I'm going to buy in the future, is it mortgage or not? So that I wrote any property that I buy and he bought it and then he sold it, or he bought it, or he said I buy it and he bought it and he transmitted it by Yerusha lo mishtabed. If you say that the creditor cannot go after that, okay, hello ishtabed, there's nothing to discuss. It's not mishubad. You're only mishabed, you're only obligate property, you only mortgage property that you have at the time of the loan. Okay, that's if you say that. But if you say but if you say that it is obligated, that I can obligate even property that I'm going to buy in the future, so what about this case? What happens if a man he borrowed money and he wrote in the IOU, you borrowed money from number one, person number one, I borrowed money and I wrote, I'm obligating not only my property I'm going to buy in the future. Okay. All right. That's what he did. And then he borrowed more money from number two. A lot of times people who have to borrow money, they borrow from multiple sources, right? So that's usually the way it works. So now he borrowed money from number two and he wrote the same thing. I'm obligating myself not only with stuff I have and the stuff I'm going to buy. So Mishdavid, lava v'lava. What happens if he borrowed and he borrowed? And then he bought something. Who gets it? The first guy or the second guy? Mao. The Kamishdavid, is it obligated to the first guy or the Basmaj or the second guy? Amar of Nachman. In other words, what's the svara? What would you say? Well, I obligated myself first to the first guy, but even when he obligated himself to the second guy, he didn't have the property yet. He didn't buy that property, only came after he obligated himself twice. So what do you say? Do you go to the first guy? Or do you say no? When he obligated himself to the second guy, he basically took off the obligation of the first guy. What do you say? Amar Nachman, Hamilsi Boilam, we had this question, they answered from Eretz Yisrael, Rishon Kana, the first guy that obligated himself, he's first in line. Rafuna Mechloko, they split it, because they both had the same obligation. In other words, even when he obligated himself to number two, there was no property yet. He only bought it afterwards. He split it. The Chain Tanu Rabba Baravu Yachlok, he split it. Amar Avina, Madura Kam Ravashi brings down Ravashi lived 60 years. And his first 30 years, he went through all of Torah Kula and he learned things in a certain way. In the first version, Ravashi said, Madura Kama, Ravashi Amrlan, Rishon Kana, the first one. That was his first view. Madur Basra in his second edition, in other words, in the last 30 years of his life, when he learned Gans Shas and everything, the second time Rashi Amrlan Yachlokis, but if Hilchsa Lachas, he split it. Because they both are equal in the obligation. He obligated himself to number one and to number two. And even when he obligated number two, he didn't have anything yet. So therefore they split it. Meisvei. How do you say he split it? We just set up above the Shvach Karkos Ketzat, when he owes the money again. The borrower borrowed money from the creditor, and then he sold property that he had that he should have reserved for the creditor, but he sold property and the purchaser improved the property, and now the creditor took away that property and the purchaser is going after the borrower who had sent him, who lent him the property, who had sold him the property, and he's looking for other property. He sold the field. The other guy improved it, right? The purchaser improved it. Now the creditor came, Vitarfa, and he seized it. Shehu Gova, when the purchaser collects now from the borrower who sold him the property, Gova Sakarm Chasr Shabanim, he collects the Karen from Chasr Shabanim, Vesashvach Minas Mechar, and the Shvach he collects from Mechar. But wait a minute. This is like number one and number two. Just like when he borrowed money from two different people, who does he owe money to now? To both these guys. He owes money to the purchaser and he owes money to the creditor. So Gova Sakarm Chasr Shabanim, Vesashvach Menachasim Benechorin. If you hold what? That they split it, you should only get half. Says Rashbam, take a look at Rashbam near the bottom of the page. Rashbam says, the imisa, about 6 lines from the bottom of the page in Rashbam, Divrei Masav, the imisa, Shekibin Shemocher Halova Sadeu, since the Lova sold the field, because of Lo Achrayas Olav, and he gave him an obligation, and then the purchaser improved it. They're both going after. In other words, the malva who had lent him the money and wants the property, and the lokeach who bought it, they both are entitled to this property over here. The malva and the purchaser. Right after they both obligated, meaning what happened? The borrower originally borrowed money from the creditor. Then he sold the property to Lokeach. So he has an obligation both to the purchaser to make good on the purchase. He sold him, and he has an obligation to the creditor to give him the property. So they're both them. When did the lova? When does he get it? After he obligated to both of them. He owes money. He owes this property to the malva to pay off the loan, and he owes the property to the purchaser because the purchaser paid the money. Therefore, the improvement should be split. Like we just said, if you borrowed from number one and number two, and then you got it. So over here, what happened? He borrowed from number one. That was the creditor. Then he sold it to number two, and he obligated himself to that too. So he sold number two as a purchaser, but he still has the same obligation as if he borrowed money from him. And then he improved it. So that improvement is like stuff that came later on, and therefore they should split it. Why do you say that? Why do you say that the malva gets the whole thing, right? The malva gets the whole thing, and then he's got to go after him. The malva shouldn't be able to get the whole property, and then the purchaser has to go looking to reimburse himself from the borrower's bnei chorin. the Malvish will only be able to get half. Again, back in the Gemara, V'imisa, 2 lines from the bottom page, V'imisa, Chatzi Shvach M'boile. So the Gemara says, my Gova Nami Diktani Chatzi Shvach, he only gets half. Umashani, back in Rashbam, now 3 lines from the bottom of the page. Umashani, my Gova Nami Chatzi Shvach. Vishnui the something you can rely on him. You can rely on it. He only gets half. Me'ashamin, and from here you see the Hadar Mashmuel B'Shnai Mochsen Baal Chov Govas Shvach. Los feeling say we don't hold like him. Go Chatzi Shvach. You only get half, not the whole thing. Be kasha. I ask kasha the Hacha boy Shmuel. Here Shmuel asked that kasha. According to the Rabbanan, would if you obligate property that you're going to buy in the future, is it obligated or not? According to the Rabbanan, Mahu v'Hasam Kamer Bachov Govas Shvach. He gets the whole thing. Dehainu deikni. So you see, you do get it. He's speaking Rav Meir, not according to Rabbanan. Inami Barlon Rabbanan, my. Where you could say he's asking a kasha from what would the Rabbanan hold, and he himself holds that it does work. But the Gemara over here is not posted. The Gemara just says according to Rav Meir it would work. According to Rabbanan, it's not sure if it would work, and therefore, when you say over here if this is an imtim salomer. We said if it doesn't work, then it doesn't work. But if it does work, and there were 2 creditors, number 1, number 2, who gets it? The answer is we split it. If you hold it when it's mashma, that's the psak that they get it, but they split it. All right, tomorrow's daf will be on the podcast. That's daf Kufnon Ches, and on Sunday, Meretz Hashem, we're going to pick it up 7 lines from the top of the page. Eli kasha hakasha. Tomorrow's daf will take you till there. Eli kasha hakasha. Pick it up from there. Have a good Shabbos, everybody.
Good Shabbos. Regards to everybody.